It's always that strange part where it says live on the one screen, but on the second screen, it does. Oh, I think we're live. Okay. Hey, everybody. All right. So it's an interesting evening. It's going to be an interesting show. Hopefully, I sound okay. I see everybody is in the live chat. Thank you for showing up. It's a really special night. Um, I have a really interesting guest. I've been friends with Jeremy for at least a year, I would say, Jeremy, on Twitter and elsewhere, would you say?
Yeah, I think just over a year.
Exactly. And we've gone back and forth, and he's taught me a lot, and it's just, a really interesting conversation we've had back and forth. And I just thought now would be a great time to have Jeremy on. And welcome to SMQAI. Welcome to the channel. We've got a lot of the regulars in here, so I appreciate it. And so I guess the best way to start this off, because I've done interviews before, but I want to try something a bit different. Why don't you tell me about yourself and what you're about and what you're into? I think that would be a cool way to start.
Yeah, no problem. And first off, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me on the show. It's an honor to be here. I've really enjoyed your show, like since the 2012 We Died in 2012 days. So
Oh,
uh,
thank you.
yeah, so what a what I'm about really. I'm about a lot of different things, but I've over the years I've developed a specialty in the occult, and especially um, I've focused on the left-hand path of the occult in particular. And that would be, in particular for me, it would be Luciferianism. And it's a little bit different than Satanism because I feel like Luciferianism is almost like what people would usually refer to as a middle path, although I don't really like any of that terminology, left hand path, right hand path, middle path kind of stuff. I like to call what I do a complete path. And I feel like people with a right hand path or left hand path goal can do it in a complete way or an incomplete way. And that's more important, to do it in a complete way because, um, sorry, I'm using a lot of jargon here.
No, no, it's good. It's fine. I use your own words. This is very interesting.
But basically, there are two main kind of goals within the occult. One of them is to reunite with the source or God or whatever kind of term you want to use for that. And it's kind of like almost like a return to Eden or a return to the womb, almost kind of uh, desire. And you kind of have this ecstatic union with God. And that's one goal, and that's generally referred to as the right hand path in, you know, the jargon. The left hand path is where you seek to become a creative force in your own right in the universe, a god in a sense, if you want to use an old school word, a lowercase g in a sense, not the god, but like a god, an active force in the universe, that active creative force in the universe. Like you could say there's a god of this, there's a god of that, right? And what kind of god you might become if you could evolve into that state. And so rather than uniting with the source in an ecstatic state of union and personal dissolution, um, it's sought to almost kind of refine the self into something more elemental and a creative force in your own right, and that would be the left hand path. And so that's what I've kind of gravitated toward. Um, and Luciferianism, I feel, is almost like a lot of people will say the left hand path is a selfish path, and I don't think that that's very fair. But there is definitely an element of rational self interest as part of that whole philosophy. So there is that, but does get exaggerated by some people, even practitioners of it fall into that. But I feel like with Luciferianism, the word Lucifer itself literally means light bearer or bringer of light. And light has always been the universal symbol of knowledge, you know, the world over for since time immemorial. Um, so that is kind of like a bringing of knowledge, kind of somebody who carries the knowledge and protects the knowledge and also distributes the knowledge as well to empower others, like Prometheus, giving the flame, stealing the fire of the gods, this forbidden knowledge, and giving it to humanity and letting them do with it what they will, to empower them, to give them a leg up, in a sense, to become more of their own, to determine their own destiny, in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a good summary of the philosophy that I've kind of specialized in over the years. And that comes with
Yeah.
occult practice as well.
Okay. Excellent. So let me ask you then, when you and I think there needs to be right in the beginning, what I would like to get and understand is I know oftentimes I'm kind of I get confused sometimes with understanding the left hand path because sometimes you'll have certain practitioners on the left hand path from someone who's an outsider looking in, and it seems almost as if they're atheists and they don't believe in a higher power. And then I'll listen to other videos or I'll read other texts or books about that sounds more closer to the left-hand path, and it actually is talking about deities in a literal form. Um, what are your feelings about first that, and then where do you fall along those two kind of delineations of that? And am I describing that even correctly? In fact.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. And that's something that does come up a lot. So I'm glad that you brought it up. So the left hand path, or the right hand path, really, but more the left hand path, because the right hand path is not quite as, um, you don't get as many atheists in the right hand path. But the left hand path, you could say, or I don't even like the term, as I said, but what we'll just use it at a convenience. But the left hand path is a philosophy, and it's independent of whether you're a theist or an atheist or an apatheist, which is kind of a term that I like for myself, which means it's like apathy and theist. So it's like you don't really care if there is a literal um, existence or not. It's kind of like agnosticism.
Mhm.
Uh, you don't really care what one way you or another. You would still live your life the way that you live your life.
Okay. So, in your practice, for as much as you're comfortable with sharing, have you ever come across a feeling or a situation where you have felt a literal or encountered with one of your senses something that is you have perceived as outside of yourself? Have you ever had that kind of feeling?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of experiences like that where I've encountered apparently external entities, you could say, um, like in the what was it, the Gateway document? They talk
Mhm.
about other intelligences.
Yes.
I have absolutely encountered other intelligences. And now the thing is, it's extremely convincing, 100% convincing, you could say, although I do still have a bit of skepticism in my own mind of whether or not to believe to believe it, even though I've experienced it in a sense. Not that I don't believe that it was a genuine experience, just the nature or the reality behind that experience is what I still have a bit of question in my mind. Like,
And
was that an external entity, or was I experiencing an externalized aspect of myself? I don't know. And I'm not sure it would matter really,
right.
because it's a powerful experience, and it's transformative, and it's real. It's very real. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure if what the difference would be exactly in how you would act. I mean, you kind of got to act as if it's real in a sense.
Mhm.
But now, when you take the mindset that it could be an aspect of yourself, then different possibilities for action uh, crop up. So there's
Okay.
different ways of working with the entity um, if you have a different mindset about it. So if you have a mindset that this is an aspect of myself, then that actually gives you a certain level of authority over the entity automatically.
And before we move on, I'd like to talk with the chat and people that may listen to the show later on. Um, if I could suggest a frame of mind, if you don't like the subject matter, what you can do, and this is just a suggestion from me to you, reading the live chat, is the point of the channel is I consider this channel an expedition. And when the Mandela effect happened to me, I had realized my reality was not what it was, and it was turned upside down. Part of my expedition began with the We Died in 2012 series, with hopefully Jeremy and I will be talking about. Also, what I consider part of the ethos of this channel is that I want to hear everything that's out there, and I'm going to explore all of that. And I hope you all come with me, and I hope you all stay with me. And if you're not comfortable with that, I completely understand that. And, you know, I think the most interesting thing about this channel is that um, there are a lot of things said about a lot of different groups and a lot of different kinds of people, and that's it. That's where the conversation ends. And it's not going to end with me there. And the reason why is because what happened to me was real and it was bigger than I was. And I need to re-understand my reality and how it works. And this is part of that process. And I hope all of you stay with me and you know just stay with me and stay with this process we're all going through together because we're all MEs. Sorry, Jeremy, I wanted to say that because you know a lot of folks that have been with me for a very long time, I just want to make sure they understand where I'm coming from, and hopefully they can understand. So
Oh
so
no, I
Jeremy.
totally understand that. And just let me add a little more context. I'm here on the show. I feel like my point to be here is to just be frank and tell people like this side of things, like to expose them to this, to the knowledge of what this is, so they understand what there's people out there thinking and doing. There are people like me. I'm not just an independent person that just does this on my own that made it up.
Yeah.
There are other people like me that have very similar philosophies and practices and experiences like I've had. And so to come on this show, I know that you guys talk a lot about these things from a different perspective. Um, and I just wanted to also share that there are people out there doing this stuff, and I just want to be frank about it to everybody. Like, this is what it is, and I don't
Right.
upset anybody. I'm not here to upset anybody. I want to be very respectful in that way. So
Absolutely. And it sort of goes back to the CIA argument I get into with people. They cross their arms and say, this CIA argument that you're pivoting off of, it's complete garbage, and the CIA you can't listen to, and they're liars, and they're this and they're that. And then what people want is they say the CIA is something and they want proof. And then you offer proof and that isn't good enough. And it's like it's a catch 22. It's like literally the CIA ripped from their hands from a FOIA request is exactly the very thing people are accusing them of doing, which is messing around with, forces that can be considered occult, and the other side of existence and all of these other things. And then whenever I present those things, people either don't want to believe that, or they try to push it away or reject it, and you end up putting yourself into this mental box, and it's as if there having no solution is the solution. And I just, that's the way I see a lot of people are saying they're angry and they're going to unsub. So I wish them well. Anyway, getting back to this, since we're talking about the Mandela effect, and oh yeah, one last thing, like you said, people are doing this whether you're upset or not, as a listener. And I know a lot of people are with me and they understand, and I appreciate that. But this is happening, and people are doing this, and you can either listen to them or you can listen to, and someone who's experienced, and someone that I respect and I've known for more than over a year, and have asked some pretty frank questions. Or you can go on and listen to other shows where the guy is screaming into the mic, and I don't know. I'm not sure if he's even stable. So I'm sorry, Jeremy.
Well,
So
I'm
what?
sorry if people are leaving because of me
No,
on the show.
no, it's fine. Let me ask you this: what are your feelings then, about the Mandela effect? Frankly, where you get land on this thing?
Yeah, well, just to clarify an earlier statement about apatheism, I do lean a little bit more towards thinking that there is something.
Hmm.
But in the end, I feel like it's hard to focus. I don't want to focus on that because in the end, it wouldn't really change my behavior all that much, really. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very
Now,
interesting way to think about it.
now, for the Mandela effect itself, now I do think there are some things that can be explained by the memory thing, but there are other ones that are very inexplicable. There are some ones that are very tenacious, I guess you could say. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
Under scrutiny, it's like, well, this is really, really convincing, certain ones. And I think that for different people, that's different. The thing that's really convincing to them might be different, which is interesting.
So, would you say, and do you get the feeling that the Mandela effect? I consider the Mandela effect as somewhat paranormal. I consider the Mandela effect something that is. I'm still trying to fall under the guise of it's a naturally occurring event that we're just now discovering. Um, and I try to think of it that way for a couple reasons. One is to keep my sanity, but also two, so I have a base to pivot from, to say that this is natural. So at least if I have that in my back pocket, and I know I sort of have, almost leaving breadcrumbs, so you know where you started from, because you can end up in a circle with these kinds of situations.
Like Hansel and Gretel.
Exactly. Absolutely.
um, yeah, I think that when I've been thinking about the Mandela effect, I've been thinking about it in that way too, as a natural occurring event. And I feel like maybe the Mayans knew about it, and maybe there were some people that had some kind of knowledge about these natural cycles. And I think that maybe it's part of a natural cycle.
Interesting. When you do your practice, and when you do either your personal meditations or your personal practices, have you felt something different, since, let's say, 2008, 2012? Are you feeling as if the world is different? Because I do. I feel as if the world has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like, well, I kind of did. I felt it coming. I felt it coming, and it was just in the zeitgeist, really. The whole 2012 thing was massive, and I think that a lot of people talk about how there's a doomsday prediction here and there, whatever, but none of them were like 2012. Um,
Hmm.
well,
Hmm.
1999 or the Y2K, I guess, was pretty close, but Why?
Hmm.
But 2012 really hit a crescendo.
Yeah, and let's explore that too. I started my channel, and one of the first stabs I had with the Mandela effect was the whole "we died in 2012" thing, and that thing went bonkers,
Hmm.
and I completely didn't expect
Well,
that.
I had been thinking about
I
that.
you had mentioned.
I'd been thinking about that, and then I
Okay.
found your video, and I was like, well, this is what I've been thinking about. Like, I've been obsessively thinking about. And
Well,
it just really connected with me when I listened to it because you were saying a lot of the things that I had already been thinking.
and yeah, and that's the thing is it was an examination because the Mandela effect made me re-examine so many things that were so base and basic to me that I didn't know they were there. So 2012 was a re-examination of what do I expect from the afterlife? What do I expect from life and the afterlife? And if life is so short and precious, why do I have to stand in lines? Why am I have to do I have to wait, on a train or a bus? And what if the afterlife is as mundane? And that's sort of where I went from there. And, you know, I you know, I don't know. And things were just odd and things have been off. And, in sort of the circles that you travel in, are you getting any feedback post 2012 like that?
Well, there's this concept of aeons,
Okay.
and it's pretty prevalent, especially in modern occultism. But it has roots that go way back. Um, there was this Catholic monk that used to talk about the age of the what was it the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And you also have in the Hindu philosophy, you have the different yugas. Kali Yuga is one of the more notorious ones. Um, and you have in modern Western occultism, you have the idea of like an aeon. Crowley talked about this a lot, and also the Temple of Set talks about this a lot too, where you have like the age of Aquarius. Actually, this ties into the whole Age of Aquarius thing. Of course, you know the song "This Is the Dawning of the Age of Aquarius."
Mhm.
Um, well, roughly every what is it, 2,300 years or 2,400 years, um, we enter a new zodiacal age, and it um, is dominated by the zodiac sign that you're currently in. And essentially that's the sign that the sun rises in against the backdrop on the morning of the spring equinox. And you have the age of Pisces. A lot of people say that we are leaving the age of Pisces, which was dominated by Christianity, which is interesting because the symbol of Jesus is a fish, and Pisces is a fish.
Mhm.
And then they're saying that we're entering into the age of Aquarius. And some people say that we have entered into the age of Aquarius. Some people say we're about to enter, but really it's a very long transition phase. It's not just like a snap of the fingers and now we're in the age of Aquarius. And maybe there is a moment at which point you do flip over, but the calculation isn't accurate enough to really pinpoint it like that. So different people have said this is when we have entered into the age of Aquarius, and this is when we've entered into the age of Aquarius. And a lot of times they had motive behind picking a certain date because they founded a certain organization at a certain time, and they said, and we founded it at the same time as the age of Aquarius, you know.
Mhm.
But that is generally part of the idea. Is you've got it's a very pervasive idea in the occult community that there are different ages or aeons, and that we've entered into a new one just now.
Interesting. So if we've entered to so these aeons, or oftentimes I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not time itself has become something that is a little less stable. And
Hmm.
I was wondering if there are any kind of occult systems or esoteric systems out there that you can think of that would even somewhat align or harmonize with what we're experiencing in terms of the past being alive, or things changing in the past, or
Hmm.
once is there anything that has been experienced before with some of these symptoms that we talk about that may coincide with other systems of the occult?
Yeah, so there's this thing called acausal magic, um, which just means that the sequence of cause and effect doesn't necessarily have to go in that order. You can have an effect before the cause. So the classic example of this would be you do a magical operation to um, because you have a need. Let's say a certain bill needs to get paid or something,
Okay.
and you do a magical operation to bring you the resources to cover that unexpected bill. Let's say, um, and then you get in the mail later that same day a check that just so happens to cover that bill, and it was from a source that you forgot that you had coming to you, um, or somebody owed you money and you didn't know that they were going to pay you back that day. You weren't expecting it yet, and they send it to you that day or whatever. But the thing is, they would have had to have put it in the mail before you did that magical operation. So, did the magical operation cause it in the past, or was it just a coincidence? But that's kind of what magic. That's kind of how magic works. Is it increases the number of meaningful coincidences.
That's very interesting because a lot of people in the Mandela effect community, like myself, we have a lot of coincidences, a lot of synchronicities. So that aligns very well. And I've been reading up quite a bit, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
since the Mandela effect hit, and I was reading the Lesser Key of Solomon, and I noticed some of the demons they talk about. Most of a lot of the higher demons they talk about, they're able to traverse time, or they're able to tell you time in a non-linear fashion. So when you juxtapose that with the idea of retrocausality, which is a scientific term, with the term that you said, the acausality magic,
Yeah.
is that yeah, okay. So then we're starting to, what I like to call, a harmonization is starting to happen then. So we're talking about a situation in which um, once again, these things that seem disparate, because science, I'm just going to get a bit around here.
Mm-hmm.
Science does love to partition itself off from anything spiritual. And I mean Christian, I mean a left hand path, I mean anything. And yet, no matter how much the movement of scientism tries, there's always some kind of harmonization, and retrocausality primarily happens at the quantum level. And yet, what you're talking about and some of the things that I've been doing on my deep dives, there's still that harmonization there, and it's almost as if science itself it acts as a shell for the spiritual world, the occult world, the unseen world. That's almost where I'm at with this. Not quite, but sometimes I just feel that way.
Yeah. Well, I always felt like uh, science was not at odds with the occult, and in fact, I did like a lecture um, on the subject of the occult in the new era, in the new aeon. because it feels like it's not really occult anymore in a sense, because the word occult literally means hidden. And it feels like a lot of these things that were once considered occult, this hidden knowledge, this forbidden and hidden knowledge, is becoming more and more understood by science. And we're not using the same terms necessarily anymore, but lucid dreaming, that
Mhm.
is that experience. And I know that there are going to be people who disagree with me, but I'm extremely experienced in this realm. um, it's the same as astral projection. It's its exact
Oh,
same state. There's multiple ways to get into that state, and lucid dreaming is one of the ways to get into that same state, um, as astral projection gets you in. And also, basically, it's the same thing as clicking out. Um,
interesting.
and so that's extremely well known in science now, right? Like, even they've done like experiments in the CIA. But you also have these scientists like Dr. Stephen Labarge. I hope I pronounced that right, but he has a sleep lab, and he's been studying this, specifically lucid dreaming, for decades in the lab, and you know, understanding the brain waves that are going on when someone's experiencing lucid dream, and other physiological things that they've been able to observe. Um, and that's not the only esoteric science that is no longer esoteric. It's well known and fully understood by science now, a lot of these things.
Yeah, and that's what I'm seeing is a flattening out of information. There's no longer a kind of vertical formation of information. A lot of information has been flattened out, and I think, particularly in the arena of censorship and politics and like the world of independent reporting, it's really having to grapple with that. And it's really the people who have the power of the platforms, they're not able to come to grips with the fact that that's already happened now. And so it's almost as if, the water keeps washing in and you have like a rake and you're trying to rake the water back as it crashes against the sand. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's what I feel like a lot of these platforms that are, they're trying to push this thing back, and it's not gonna happen. And I think that's for things like the occult and things like science. I what and let me be clear about this for everybody. When I love science, what I'm talking about is scientism in terms of it being a political and economic tool for pushing people out and using that authority of one single person, the but science argument, in order to push out conversations of people who aren't experts, you
Yes.
know, right? And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that there needs to be more of a seat at the table for the spiritual side, the paranormal, the occult, in the traditional sense. People, practitioners like you, there needs to be a place at the table now, and I think science needs to come to grips with that because we just talked about, this acausal magic. You just explained retrocausality, and that's a scientific happening. So that those things are the same thing, and it's just at this point, it gets back to my point about language. All we're arguing over is semantics at this point, you know? Um, so let me ask you, what are your thoughts about that then, about the clicking out? It sounds like you're pretty well versed in the document. I know you and I have talked about it outside of the show. What are your feelings on the idea of there being non-corporeal intelligences and our government having a reaction system to protect the particular agents or officers or whomever, and they have backup plans to sort of repulse those particular non-corporeal intelligences. What does that say to you, and what do you think?
It's extremely familiar, and I think that it's definitely a prudent measure to have those techniques of separating yourself from a non-corporeal entity that you've encountered. Um, yeah, I just want to sorry, just gather my thoughts here.
No, it's good. Take your time. I'm totally interested because you have the experience. Take your time.
Yeah, so definitely if these people are experimenting with clicking out, as they call it, they're
Mhm.
definitely going to experience non-corporeal entities for sure. Like it's not just some inevitable thing down the road. Like I'm not sure how they're not encountering them immediately.
Interesting.
That's been my experience. I mean, it's essentially you're taking the dream state and you are entering it consciously, intentionally and consciously. You are triggering that directly from a waking state. And just like any dream, there are tons of entities. There are tons of non-physical intelligences that are going to want to interact with you. Sometimes I've gone into a session with the intention of performing a ceremony on the astral. And basically, what that means is the non physical space that you can consciously enter. And it's another hologram or another
Mhm.
level of the hologram. And it's funny because I use the terminology hologram, and I have for like I don't know how long, like decades, where I referred to. Okay, I guess let's take it to the basics. So when you are walking around and experiencing what you're experiencing right now, and everybody listening right now, this everything that you're experiencing around you, the sense of touch, the sense of sight, everything like that you're seeing, feeling, hearing, uh, is because your sense organs are picking up data from the environment around you and translating that into an electrochemical signal, which gets sent to the central nervous system in the brain. And then that gets compiled into an experience, which I call the hologram, because it's a multidimensional, fully immersive experience that's being generated inside your head based off of that data that's coming in, right? So that's
Mhm.
your hologram that you're experiencing. It's kind of like your heads up display to navigating and interacting with the universe around you. It's your own internal. It's not you're not actually uh, what you're experiencing isn't the universe. What you're experiencing is like a heads up display inside your vehicle kind of thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now you can change a channel, and instead of having your hologram being generated from the inputs primarily coming from your sense organs, you can have your hologram be generated primarily from other inputs other than your physical sense organs. And there's speculation on what that other source could potentially be. It could be like it seems to draw from, it'll draw from your memories and other internal experiences, and also from your deep psyche, I believe. But if our brain is an antenna, or the physical matrix of our brain is an antenna for signals or
Mhm.
something beyond that, if we can accept information from other sources that are non-physical, then that could be a source of data that you're getting that's generating that other hologram.
I like that. But with that, it almost sounds like, well, it sounds as if, and the document backs this up as well, as if the brain itself is creating the hologram? If that's the case, are we on the astral plane, like our real quote unquote real selves, meaning not this illusion of this body? And if we are on the astral plane, are we very vulnerable? Or if not the astral plane, we are somewhere else. I get the feeling we're somewhere else. And
We're
I
both. We're in
worry.
both. The thing it's just what part of it that you're tuned into at the time. Where the thing is, there's no physical body in the sense that we think of it. It's just vibrations bouncing against each other. The whole universe is just vibrations bouncing against each other and creating standing waves and uh, dynamic waves and all of that. And we are taking in that information in a node, an energy node, which is ourself, our mind, I guess, a nodule in that wave pattern of the universe, and are processing the data around us in a different way.
So would you say like various magical practices then is a way to kind of switch up an individual's frequency, or the immediate frequencies around them, or whatever the intention is for a particular procedure or ritual or whatever it may be? Would it be, is that a fair way to describe it whenever we're talking, at least for this session?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even practices called vibrations where you will well, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but for the
Yeah.
people listening, when you can vibrate a word of power, it is supposed to have a dramatic effect on the environment around you and the universe at large. Because we do have a holographic. Because if this is a holographic universe, then a change in one part of it changes the whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the all is encoded in every part, right?
Absolutely.
So if you make a localized change, and then it changes the whole universe or multiverse potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing too. I've heard people talk about having a multiverse and then there being a dimension directly next to ours. And sometimes they can hear loud noises only certain people can hear. And they're thinking that in that there's some kind of combat or something happening the next dimension over, almost like next door. And I honestly, at first, it was I don't know, I was kind of shrugging that one. But the more I start to learn about frequency, and the more I can understand the impact that it actually has, I could, and now knowing that there is most likely more than one version of this reality, it doesn't sound that far fetched to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I never heard that particular one before, but in it might not be literal vibrations within the vocal, or not vocal but audible sound range, but it might be vibrations, sound in a sense, that are experienced in a different way or through a different sense or organ of the body potentially, or of the spiritual body. I think that we exist on multiple planes,
Mm.
and depending on your focus, you can focus in on different planes of existence. So that's part of what magic is being able to train your mind in order to change what inputs you're utilizing to create your hologram, or even to shut the hologram off completely. Um, that is a very advanced technique called the what is it called, the clear light, in Tibetan Buddhism, where
Mm.
they do this advanced form of sleep yoga, where they are fully conscious during non-dream sleep. And to me, that's when you are kind of experiencing the pure realm, without interpretation. You're just kind of existing, and you are just kind of pure consciousness at that point. You're existing in what they call the ground of being in Buddhism. But that's a state that you can go into and come back out of. A lot of people are afraid of losing themselves. But we do it all the time anyway, every single night. But we're not conscious. This is adding consciousness to that deep dreamless state, and you can be conscious during that. It's kind of mind-blowing. And I think a lot of people experience it here and there, but they don't realize it. And that falling feeling that you get sometimes when you're asleep and there's nothing around you, it's just a sensation of falling. That's actually part of that, because the hologram isn't there and you're used to feeling gravity. You're used to feeling gravity, and so when that sensation is not there, the brain interprets it as falling because it's a weightless feeling, and that is basically a temper. And usually you just jolt yourself out of it. But that is part of it, where you are not experiencing a hologram in that moment, but you're just experiencing being conscious without the hologram active.
So, oh, by the way, Carol, I see you. I sensed you were here. I see you. You're not alone. Let me ask you. I've dreamed before where I feel like I'm pushing myself up and flying, and then I've dreamed before where I've gone to a state where people are saying kind of gibberish when I'm talking to someone, and now I've gotten to the point to where they're not saying gibberish, and I'm able to almost bring back not just everything, but almost like not just the full conversation, like word by word in English, but I can understand the intent and the meaning and the emotion and all of that with me. What would you say that is?
That's a nonverbal communication. So they're like, it's conveying meaning without encoding it into symbols of language. It's more of a direct communication in that sense between consciousnesses, I suppose. And I do believe, like, it's hard to say sometimes if it's a part of you or not. And some people say that we're all part of one giant superorganism anyway.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, like, are you able to have that direct communication because it's part of you, or because you are not limited by the physical plane at that moment?
Yeah. Well, I know right after my car accident, I had this experience where I thought I was laying on the couch and I got up. And then I went into the bathroom and I wanted to blow my nose or something like that. And I went to reach for the roll of toilet paper on the wall, and my hand went through it, and I was instantly stressed and terrified. And then I woke up. What was that? Was that astral travel, or was that just another dream?
Well, I think that every dream is astral travel.
Okay. Okay.
Every
Interesting.
dream is astral travel, except usually we're sleepwalking through it. We're just reacting habitually to our environment. We're just kind of we're not actively exploring that realm usually. You know what I mean? Usually, most of the time, when you have a dream, you accept the reality that's being presented to you as a physical reality, as a literal physical reality, and you react to it the way that you have habitually built up your predilections and reactions to. And and most of the time you go through the dream, and the whole time you were duped by it, thinking that it was something that it wasn't. And then
Okay.
you wake up, and then you're like, oh wow, that whole dream I just reacted to the whole thing, and I didn't have a conscious act in the whole dream. Sorry, you do have conscious acts within the dream, but they are done in a state of ignorance as to the nature of the reality that you're experiencing at the time.
Okay, if that's the case, then people who experience the Mandela effect intensely, now that we're questioning this reality, have we somehow dislodged ourselves from the natural sort of seat or the natural progression that most normal people have? Because those of us that see it and know it's real, have we, in a way, either for better or for worse, we've sort of come loose for lack of because we have no language for this, and that's part of what this channel I'm trying to, carry along with this channel is create some kind of language for this and develop systems of understanding. Like tonight, I think we've developed some real solid understanding, taking retrocausality, a scientific term, and marrying it very, very well with an occult term and still proving once again my point that the two are inseparable. But anyway, I'm sorry, that was an ego moment. But anyway, the point I'm trying to say is that if this waking state that we're in and we no longer can put our faith in this waking state as we did before, because we do see the Mandela effect. Like the most recent one for me is that Grand Central Station is now Grand Central Terminal. Not to mention, yeah, not to mention just the personal ones that I have. That's, but I'm talking about the mass ones. Are we somehow, dislodging ourselves and are we doing it as a mass group and somehow modifying reality itself, the properties, the frequency properties, the cymatic properties of reality itself?
From my perspective, this is what's going on. We've entered into a new aeon, a new creation in a sense. According to the Mayans, it's a new. The old creation ended, and the new creation began. It's happened more than once. We're in the fifth creation now. Um, this is how I feel that's probably the way it is. That's probably a good way of describing what happened, and that we are in this new creation, and it's more plastic than the old one,
Hmm.
and there are more people that are noticing, or there are people that are in the Mandela effect community that are people who have noticed that we have entered into this new creation, that we're in this new universe, and that we you have even come up with names for the new universe. I think you call it Orion Arm, right?
Yeah, yeah. We say, we were in Sagittarius and now we're in Orion or Orion Spur. It just depends on who you talk to, but the general consensus is Orion, correct? Yes.
So we've entered into. So you've come up with your own terminology for these things as well, and so we've entered into the new Orion universe, let's say,
Hmm. Hmm.
and the people that are noticing the differences between the old and the new and the plasticity of this new universe are entering into co-creation with the universal creative forces that are guiding the development and sustaining forces of the universe itself. Like you have all these different forces of the universe, right? You
Hmm.
have the strong magnetic or the strong nuclear and the weak nuclear and all these different forces, right? You have electromagnetic and you have gravity. Although that's a weird one, um, I'm not sure it really exists, but you have all these different forces and you have these forces of nature. as well that guide um, and seem to characterize different aspects of nature, and we are part of that, and we become co-creators in the way that the universe ends up turning out.
Interesting. And that's what I've said too, is that the co-creation side of the CIA FOIA documents are pretty powerful because they call it patterning, and they use a form of patterning. And I think it's page 27, section J and K. They talk about the use of that patterning to repel those non-corporeal life forces. But what I'm thinking is that the Mandela effect and this change, this new aeon, has been so powerful. We're able to take a lot of those things that we would do in another hologram, so to speak, and it's almost as if it's here with us. And I know for me personally, it sent me on this kind of quest. And, you know, everyone in this chat and everyone part of the that's part of the channel, and including you and everyone I know on Twitter is part of, my own journey. But I also like to think that I'm co-creating with everybody else too. But in doing that, I've almost taken on, and it dawned on me about 6 months ago that I've taken on that responsibility with everyone else. And that's when I started to pivot more towards not being proselytizing with the Mandela effect and kind of pulling back with it, because um, I stick with the idea that it has to hit you in a very personal way, or it has to resonate with you, or you have to see it, or because you're just not ready for it. And I just don't think everyone is quite ready for it. And again, it weaves very well with a lot of occult.
Absolutely.
The
I was just thinking
Yeah.
that, like,
Hmm.
for example, just to pick a classic example that a lot of people will recognize is in Freemasonry. Although it does still happen, people aren't really supposed to be invited. Um, you're supposed to come to it of your own free will and accord. And
Oh.
the thing is, like, people can make it known that they're a Freemason, but uh, generally, if you want to become a Freemason, you ask them about it. They usually won't invite you. Sometimes they do anyways, but they're not really supposed to. But sometimes a buddy will be like, hey, you really should get into this, is really cool or something, right? And they're not really supposed to do that, but people being people. They'll do that with
Absolutely.
their friends. They'll tell their friend, hey, you should probably. But the symbolic kind of um, what's the word, rule or concept behind that is that you're not really supposed to invite people. They're supposed to ask you about it, and then you can tell them about it, and if they're interested, they're interested, but you're not
Mhm.
really supposed to proselytize that. And the same thing goes with a lot of occult groups as well. Most occult groups don't really actively go out there recruiting. They'll make their presence known, and if anybody is interested, then they'll approach them.
Yeah, and I'm that's kind of the feeling I'm getting with the Mandela effect, simply because when I did the 2012 series, there was a group of people who they reacted poorly, and I'm saying that delicately. And I realized that you can simply put an idea out there, and if it messes with someone's framework or their paradigm or whatever you want to call it, you can, you know, send them spinning, and it's just the slightest thing could set some people off, and it's just I take it as a responsibility. Now I do. It took me a long time to get to that, but that's where I'm kind of at this point with the channel and my understanding of the Mandela effect, and what I do with my power of now and the other practices that I do. So I'm really going sort of that route now. Of course, I'm not saying that, demanding that from others who are MEs. Everyone has to do their own thing, but just my behavior, for what it's worth, that's how I don't even talk about it anymore in my real life, because I've seen how people react to it. It's visceral, whether it's interest or it's like being very, very upset immediately.
Well, that's interesting. You know, as you talk, a lot of things come up in my head, and I'm trying to pick which one to bring up. But
Sure,
um,
sure. You
this
can interview me, sure.
this recurring thing that happens in a lot of my dreams, and actually is something that helps trigger me to recognize that I'm dreaming sometimes. Um, Within a dream, if it's not a lucid dream to begin with, if I'm caught up in the dream, if I see crazy things in the sky, um, like fireworks or UFOs or
Hmm.
uh, giant planets or extra moons or things like that or extra suns, then that I've trained myself to say I'm probably dreaming right now, and then there's certain procedure that I do to test um, what the nature of the hologram I'm experiencing at the time is, whether it's a dreaming hologram or a waking hologram. And the UFOs, that's a very consistent thing. And it's funny because sometimes in the dream itself, I've there's one dream in particular that really kind of shook me. And in the dream, there was a UFO, and it was kind of a classic flying saucer with like chrome kind of colored shiny in the sky, kind of hovering there, and it was just very obvious and freaky. And I was with somebody in the dream, and I turned to them and I said, hey, look, do you see that? And they looked up, and then immediately they looked away and pretended like they didn't see it. And I was like, did you saw it, right? And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they couldn't process it. It was too much for them to process. So they just, their mind blanked it out, basically, or their mind immediately suppressed it, and
Hmm.
they refused to look back up there because part of their brain knew, or you know, I mean, this is a dream character, right? This is a non-corporeal entity that I'm interacting with that is just in the environment, and I'm like, hey, look at that.
Hmm.
And they couldn't handle it, and there was a couple other people, and I tried to get them to look, and they wouldn't even look.
Wow. That's a
And
lot like this
it
this
really just that just struck me, and it's impacted me. For that was a long time ago. That was like 20 years ago that I had that.
It's interesting. Um, I know I'll get into a semi-dream state and I can remind myself. I'll start to feel the emotion in the dream and I can, if I'm not deep into sleep, but I'll be in a semi, like just like stage one or whatever, I can pull myself out and say, nah, this isn't real. I'll know right away. But I will get into a deep sleep and have absolutely no control over getting out of there. But I have brought back the feeling of flying and being able and being excited and happy that I could flap my arms and kind of fly and being happy about that too. So it's very odd. But my dreams, it's always nighttime. I've never had a dream where it was daytime.
Oh,
It's
really?
yeah, never. I've never had a dream where I'm walking around in the sun. I don't know what that means about my subconscious, but yeah,
That's really
but
interesting.
yeah. So, oh, you've had a dream where you were in the sun?
Oh yeah, lots. Yeah,
Oh man, I wish I did.
I've had nighttime and daytime dreams.
Interesting.
The
Not me.
flying is very exhilarating.
The flying is
Another one you
wonderful.
could try that is a little bit harder than flying in a dream is to pass through an object like a wall or a door. Actually, if you pass through a door, it's easier than through a wall.
Mm,
Part of the brain, or mind, I should say, part of the mind, I guess, is so conditioned to think of a door as a gateway, I guess, and
mhm,
a wall as a barrier, that it's easier to tell yourself this is non-physical. Of course, I can pass through it and then do it. But when you try and go through a wall in a dream, uh, it's hard. But try and walk through a closed door, solid, well, in the dream, solid closed door, and it's easier. to wrap your mind around passing through the door, the solid door that it is to pass through the wall.
And that goes back sort of to, did you follow that doorway thing that I was talking about that
Yeah.
recently? Yeah, that's
Now,
crazy, right?
one of the major practices that people will do is every time they pass through a door, they will remind themselves to check whether or not they're dreaming or not. And that's one way to put that into your habitual behavior, to drill that into your habitual behavior so that, as I said before, when you're in a dream and you don't realize you're dreaming, you just kind of react habitually to your stimulus. And so, if part of your habitual behavior is to check whether you're dreaming or not, then eventually that'll work its way into a dream. And in the dream, you'll check whether you're dreaming or not. And you might, if you're lucky, actually realize, oh, yeah, this is a dream. You know, the first bunch of times that you question whether or not you're dreaming in a dream, usually you end up concluding, no, I'm awake. And then you wake up later and you're like, are you kidding me? That I was so convinced that it was real, and it's actually a very transformative thing to occur, because
Interesting.
then you can realize, when you have a few of those experiences, you start to realize how real a dream feels when you're in it, and
Yeah.
it feels just as real as what you're experiencing now. Sometimes even more. Sometimes hyper real. Um,
Yes.
And when you become lucid in the dream, when you are aware of the nature of the reality that you're experiencing, when you're in the dream, it takes on even more intensity.
Mm.
It's quite invigorating, and uh, it actually, you become more operative on different levels of your own existence. You become more conscious and
Okay.
operative on those other levels, right? Because normally you're operating on those other levels in a subconscious way. Usually you're just kind of reactive, right?
Hmm.
But when you can bring that consciousness, that higher level of consciousness, into that dream, then that's another level of being that you are expanding your uh, conscious control and intention into. So then you can act consciously rather than just react in a habitual way. We have some control over it because we have control over what habits we develop in ourselves. But
Interesting.
we can expand that control by actually bringing greater consciousness into those uh, frequency ranges, you could say.
Excellent. Well, one of the hallmarks of this channel and this show is I keep everything to an hour. We've gone 12 minutes over because you're so interesting. Um, and I think I would like to have you on again. If you would like to come on again, I'd like to talk to you more.
Yeah, I'd love to come on again. I hopefully I don't upset your viewers too much.
It's fine. Really, I mean, I can see a lot of the, core group and the core crew, they stuck around and I appreciate it. And the others, I hope they come back, because this is all about, the expedition, the
Thank you.
exploration and the understanding.
And I just, I just want people to know this, to have access to this information. That's why I do this kind of thing. Yeah, I don't feel like it needs to be occult anymore, and it's not really.
Hmm.
It is actually known, but it's still esoteric in the sense that it's not well known. It's not a secret, but it's just kind of, you have to look into it to find out the information. And so
Right. If you want a
putting that,
holistic.
creating a space for that information to be, for people to find it, is one of the things that I do.
And that's just it. If you really want to have an informed, holistic point of view about things, you have to go to places sometimes that you normally wouldn't go. Well, you are not that for me, but I know some audience members,
Hmm.
you are, you know, a rare commodity. But for me, you're not. But I understood that. But I also knew that you have decades more experience in you know the occult and things like this than I do. So in that way, you know, I wanted to share that with everyone on the channel. My own learning from you, because as far as I'm concerned, we could have done this without an audience, but I wanted to incorporate the channel and the audience because maybe you know I know what I got
Hmm.
out of the interview. Hopefully there are other pieces of wisdom others got out for themselves, and hopefully they can apply that in their own lives in a constructive way so they can understand not just the Mandela effect, perhaps something completely different that I'm not expecting, hopefully, because you know the things that you've said in this interview have been incredibly helpful and interesting. So
Well,
is there anything you want to tell people about, you know, how to get more Jeremy Crow? I mean, Twitter, or what, I mean, where can we get you? Where can we find you?
yeah, sure. Well, I just wanted to say I'm glad that I was able to give back a little because I have gotten so much from your channel. It really does spark a lot of interesting trains of thought in me when I'm listening to your channel, and I really enjoy it, and it's very thought provoking, and I've gotten a lot out of it. So I'm glad that I was able to kind of contribute to the corpus of knowledge that you're bringing to the people.
Well, thank you. Well,
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
yeah, and thanks again for having me on. If anybody wants to find out a bit more about me, I have my own YouTube channel. It's at Jeremy Crow, and you can also, I think my username on there is Ziggurat of Enki, but you can just look up Jeremy Crow with no E on the end. It's just CROW. And I have a website, jeremycrow.com, and Twitter at Jeremy Crow. Basically, anything is just Jeremy Crow. Mines, all those different platforms, BitChute, pretty much on everything. I'm at Jeremy Crow. So you can just look me up like that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I look forward to part two and maybe a part three of this conversation. And
Hmm.
obviously I'll see you around on Twitter and everything. So Jeremy Crow, I want to thank you very much for you know the SMQ AI community and just me personally. I want to thank you for coming on the
Yeah,
channel.
thanks again for having me, and thanks to your audience as well for sticking around. The people who stuck around,
Excellent.
especially.
Absolutely. And I'm going to stop the broadcast, but we can talk for a second afterwards.
Okay.
So, all right, everybody, that's it. And we're going to do our normal stuff Saturday for the Lost and Found bin. And then I'll be on Truth Frequency Radio this Sunday at 5 o'clock, everybody. Thanks a lot. Hopefully, you got something really, really good out of this. Thank you.